Have another topic to discuss. But first, let me ask, which come first? Is it the egg or is it the chicken? Diba, this is the most question that you really wanted to know? Kung sino yung nauna, ang itlog ba or ang manok? Okay. So to answer all your question, then later we will find out which one comes first. So if you're ready, then join me in our discussion. So our topic for today is about perpetuation of life. Now, I will ask you, what is perpetuation of life? Why is it important to discuss all these things? Okay. When we say perpetuation of life, the word perpetuate means something to continue. So, in other words, our topic for today is all about reproduction. So, it can be in plant and it can be in animals. Okay? Now, before we will proceed, let us first read our learning objectives for this lesson. So at the end of the discussion, you shall be able to define reproduction, identify the types of reproduction both in plants and animals, describe the different ways of how plants and animals reproduce, then describe the different ways of how representative animals reproduce, then appreciate the value of life to maintain the continuity of life. Okay? Let's have a quick look at the concept map, our guide for our today's lesson. So reproduction involves DNA, so which is the physical carrier of genetic information passed from parents to offspring. So DNA, which can be also modified to form genetically modified organism. So this topic will be discussed next meeting. So for today, reproduction is classified into two. So we have asexual reproduction and the sexual reproduction. So how do they differ? For asexual reproduction, this does not involve the fission of sex cells. It requires only one parent. Then, offspring known as clones and are genetically identical, to parents. So for sexual reproduction, this involves fusion of two sex cells. So usually they require two parents. Then offspring show variation that are not the exact copy of the parents. So again, reproduction is the process of producing offspring that are biologically or genetically similar to the parent organism. So usually in plants, or just like other living organisms, are also part of the circle of life. So they cannot live forever, and therefore each species of plants and even animals, or let's say all living things, must replace themselves with younger members of their kind. So, have you ever seen a plant in your garden turn into a big tree after several years of nurturing? Or you probably would ask how these things happen. So, you can recall that this process of growth and development is also related to the distinguishing characteristics of living things. So, we will have to discover more on reproduction. How do plants and animals reproduce both asexually and sexually? So you have to remember that both plants and animals can reproduce in either way. It can be asexual or it can be sexual. Now, to start with, we have to read what is a reproduction. So again, it is the biological process by which new individual organisms or offspring are produced from their parents. So, reproduction is a fundamental feature of all known life. Each individual organism exists as a result of reproduction. So there are two types of reproduction. You have sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. So class, when we say asexual reproduction, this refers to the type of reproduction in which only a single organism gives rise to a new individual. So, meaning to say, this does not involve the fusion of gametes, and therefore, the offspring produced are genetically identical to the parents. So, halimbawa, kung tinanim mo ang isang puno ng santol, then of course, paglaki nito, santol pa rin. Or kung kumuha ka ng similya ng isang tanim na or bulaklak or halaman or bulaklak na bougainvillea, so paglaki nito, ito isang bougainvillea pa din. Right? So, many of plants on earth are produced through asexual means. So, this type of reproduction is also advantageous to plants when they are adapted to a particular environment and the genetic variation among plant members is not necessary. Okay. So most plants are able to reproduce asexually in a variety of means or strategies. So depende na yan kung anong gusto nyong gawin. So there are also types on how you are going to propagate those plants. So it is up to you. So again, this type of reproduction is being practiced widely. Kasi madali lang itong gawin. So, we have here the different kind or types of asexual reproduction. So, you can use such as binary fission, the budding, fragmentation, and the sporogenesis. So this is the way how you are going to reproduce or to propagate them. So these four ways can be possible in asexual reproduction. Okay? Now, how about binary fission? How are you going to do this or paano? So in this, the cell split into two each cell carrying a copy of the DNA from the parent cell. So for example, the amoeba. The amoeba can reproduce in the process of binary fission. So they can multiply as much as they could. So for budding in this, a small bud like outgrowth gives rise to a new individual. So the outgrowth remain attached to the organism until it is fully grown. So once it is fully grown, then this will detaches itself as lives as an individual organism. So pwede nyo na itong itanim sa ibang pagtaniman. So that is the way how you could also propagate that type of plant. So that is budding. So these are the example of budding. Okay, so try to have a look on this. So you have here the parent hydra. So this parent hydra will develop bud. So if you look at so once the bud grows, it will just breaks off from the parent, then it will become now another individual organism or the independent hydra. Okay, and this will grow into another area. Okay. So class for fragmentation. So in this, the parent organism splits into several parts, and each part grows into a new individual. So you have here an example of planaria. So this is how they are going to reproduce. Now, if you cut them in many or in several pieces, then it will produce many copies of each kind. So if you divide only into two, then the head part will generate a new tail, and the tail end that will generate also a new head. So if you cut this or if you divide this into, let's say, 3, 4, 5, then the same process. It will generate a new tail or it can generate a new head. Okay. Now, for sporogenesis, in this type of reproduction, a new organism grows from the spores. So this can be created without fertilization and can spread through wind and animals. Okay. So you have here an example of sporogenesis. So the most common, and we are also familiar, is the mushroom. So mushroom is the one example of sporogenesis when it comes to reproduction. So reproduction via spores involves the spreading of the spores by either water or in air, or even if there is a strong wind, then it can reproduce. Okay. Plants reproduce by sexual and asexual means. So the type of reproduction in plants from its vegetative parts or specialized reproductive structures, that is what you call the vegetative reproduction. So the structures of plants that reproduce vegetatively come mostly from modified stems, such as runners, tubers, the corms, and the rhizomes. So, try to look at that figure or the picture, which is also here in the slides. Then that shows the modified vegetative structure of plants used in vegetative reproduction. Okay. Now, we have reproduction in animals. So, the animal kingdom is as diverse as a plant kingdom, particularly in terms of how they reproduce. So, majority of animals reproduce sexually, but lower forms reproduce via asexual reproduction. Okay. Animals reproduce both sexual and asexual. Okay, so again, sexual reproduction is a type of reproduction that involves the production of an offspring by fusion of male and female gametes. So two parents are involved in this kind of reproduction. Now, the process usually slow and complex compared to asexual reproduction. The organisms produced are genetically diverse, so thus they can evolve along with the changing climatic conditions. Humans and many multicellular organisms exhibit a sexual mode of reproduction. So again, in sexual reproduction, it involves the fusion of male and female gametes. So this is the process known fertilization. So fertilization can be external or internal. Now, reproductive organs, because these are the organs involved in reproduction. So for the male, it comprises a pair of testes, sperm ducts, and a penis. So the sperms are produced by the testes. So the sperms are very small in size with a head, a middle piece, and a tail. Okay, so this is how it looks like. Now, for the female, comprise a pair of ovaries, oviducts, and the uterus. So the eggs, which is also known as the ova, are produced by the ovaries. So the development of the baby takes place in the uterus. A mature egg is released into the oviduct every month. That is why the female usually have their monthly period every month. Now, what is fertilization? So, the semen contains millions of sperm. A single sperm fuses with the ova during fertilization. So the nuclei of the egg and the sperm fuse together to form a single nucleus, and that a zygote is now formed. Okay. So how internal fertilization happens? So the fertilization that takes place inside the body of the female is known as internal fertilization. So for example, you have humans, cows, dogs. So it is usually internal fertilization. So this method is more prevalent in terrestrial animals. However, some aquatic animals also adopt this method. So this may take place by direct introduction of sperm by the male in the female reproductive tract, or the male deposits the sperm in the environment which is picked up by the female in her reproductive tract. So fertilization occurs internal. Okay. So there are three ways by which offspring are produced by internal fertilization. So by means of oviparity, so the fertilized eggs are laid outside where they receive nourishment from the yolk. Then we have the ovoviparity. The fertilized eggs are retained in the female's body, where they receive nourishment from the yolk. The eggs are laid right before they are hatched. And we have the viviparity, in which the offspring are born directly instead of hatching from the eggs. So they receive nutrition from the mother, and this can be seen in for external fertilization. In many organisms, particularly aquatic animals, so sexual reproduction occurs outside of the body. So, for example, in most fish or amphibians, female lay eggs somewhere, usually on the seabed or river bed. So then the male comes along and what happened? Of course, spray the eggs with sperm cells and fertilization takes place. Okay, so even frogs, they also do that. So most fertilization takes place during the process of spawning. So the environmental signals such as water, temperature also trigger the spawning of this kind of living things or species. Now, reproduction is very important. Why? This is also to preserve the continuity of the species and also to transmit the hereditary information of such organism. Okay, so the context of producing an offspring is the reproductive system that has functions. What are the functions? These are to produce the eggs and the sperm cells, and then they transport and sustain these cells, then nurture the developing offspring, and of course, to produce hormones. So this is really important in order for life to survive. So pag walang buhay, then anong mangyayari? 'Di ba? No more fun. So for us to continue, then we have to preserve life. And we have to take care of our environment. Kasi diyan tayo nabubuhay at diyan din tayo nakatira. Okay? Oh, so this is the last slides of our discussion. I hope we have an interesting discussion for today. So, how important reproduction in our lives? Diba? So, again, we always have to value life itself. Kasi pag hindi tayo marunong mag-value, then parang wala lang sa atin ang buhay. So, again, Thank you so much, my dear students, for joining me in this short discussion. And I would like you to visit our learning site. It is posted here for you to answer the activities, the quiz, and of course, you can also read other resources that are in line with our topic. So, thank you and have a blessed day ahead of us. So, see you next. Bye-bye.